Hello everyone, back with Patty Reed's Doll, Chapter 13, The Valley of the Great Salt Lake. The news that Mr. Stanton and Mr. McCutcheon brought was not good either. They said that there was still another mountain to cross before we came to the valley we saw in the distance. When they heard this, some of the men grumbled angrily. They said very cross things about Mr. Hastings and his cutoff, and even accused Mr. Reed and Mr. Donner of being irresponsible. Although it seemed to me that Patty's father had made the biggest effort of any of them, since it was he who had hunted out Mr. Hastings and brought back the information about the trail. There was nothing for them to do but cut their way over another ugly mountain, felling timber, digging down hills, filling ravines, and rolling away boulders so the wagons could pass. Doubling the ox teams, they pulled the wagons safely over a steep, sheer cliff, and finally we came out into the open expanse of the Salt Lake Valley. Patty's father didn't look cheerful as he wrote in his little book that night. 21 days since we first camped by the Weber River, and we have come only 36 miles. The next day we pushed on again, but this time it was easier going. The plain was flat and level, and before evening we were traveling once more in the tracks made by Hastings' party, so we knew that we were at last back on the trail. Several days later, we camped at a strange place where there were 20 wells of cold, pure water filled to the brim, but not spilling over onto the hard, dry ground around them. Little ones and big ones, they were all counted by the children, and one of the older boys let a rope down to see how deep one of them was. The 70 feet of rope disappeared without ever touching the bottom. The next day we crossed another dry, dusty plain covered with sagebrush and came to another fine meadow with clear springs. Here a signboard had been set up, but the paper attached to it was torn in bits and scattered on the ground. It was surely a message from Mr. Hastings, Mrs. Donner said. I'm afraid we'll never know now what it said, her husband answered. We were all standing around looking down at the tattered paper that we knew must have been a message of great importance to us. No doubt it's about the dry drive that lies ahead of us, Patty's father said. It looks like birds must have pecked it to pieces. Patty and Leanna began picking up some of the scraps, and Mrs. Donner, looking at several of the larger ones, said, I think we might piece them together and make out the words. Several other people started scratching among the grasses and sifting the loose soil through their fingers to gather the bits. Mrs. Donner laid the signboard on the hard ground and pieced out the puzzle until finally she could read 2 days, ... and 2 nights, it says. More of the scraps were fitted in, and then she read hard driving, ... reach the next grass and water. 2 days and nights of hard driving to reach grass and water. It's a warning from Hastings, clear enough, Uncle George Donner said. That doesn't sound right, Patty's father spoke up. They told us back at Fort Bridger that the dry drive was only 35 to 40 miles at most. That's only 2 days driving. 2 nights would make it twice as far. This Hastings is a scoundrel, I say, one of the men growled. Well, there's nothing to do but fill up our water casks and cut as much grass as we can carry for the cattle, someone else added. For 36 hours we camped by the springs while the men stored water and grass, and the woman did up a lot of cooking to last out the trip across the desert, where there would be no fuel. Then, beneath a blazing sun, we started across a dry, flat wasteland. About 10 miles out, a range of rough hills loomed up. Will we have to cross them? Patty's mother asked as she rode alongside her husband, and each of them with one of the boys in front. Puss and Patty were doubling up on Billy. It surely looks as we will, he answered. Hastings' wagon tracks point straight at them. That's something else they forgot to mention to us about this dry drive, that there was a mountain to cross in the middle of it. And that is the end of chapter 13. Check back tomorrow and we will read chapter 14, the Salt Desert. See you then. Bye.